Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers. I am Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, May 26th. We are on the cusp of the Memorial Day weekend when we honor America's military and war dead, and also the unofficial start of summer. And who's ever in first place on Memorial Day, as you know, Mark, is supposed to go all the way. Joined by my longtime friend and colleague, Mark Z. Barabak, roaming political columnist for the By God Los Angeles Times. Thanks for being with me, partner.
Always a privilege to be here.
I think for all two geezer newspaper guys, we reached the peak of meta this week, Mark. You interviewed me for the Los Angeles Times, and now I am here interviewing you about your interview with me about the Los Angeles Times. But the subject was the senior senator from California, Dianne Feinstein. And, you know, as I've said all along, she's never going to go willingly. But what's your take on the current status of that situation?
Well, I will point out, for those who may not know, we say senior in the fact that she is the longest serving California senator. That's not some kind of jab at our 89-year-old senator, who, it's been really nothing but bad news since she was reelected in 2018. The latest being a poll conducted by the folks at UC Berkeley for the LA Times that showed, most folks want her to step aside, step down, resign. I spoke with the aforementioned expert on Dianne Feinstein. You're too modest to point it out, but I won't. You literally wrote the book on Dianne Feinstein, a very fine biography that came out, Never Let Them See You Cry, which is why I showed up on your doorstep to talk about her. The poll's not surprising. Like I said, there hasn't been very much good news for Dianne Feinstein in a very, very long time. A lot of reports about mental decline, physical decline. I mean, you could see it for yourself. She got shingles, encephalitis associated with it. She's had a really, really bad, difficult stretch. And I mean, we'll talk about it at greater length, I'm sure. But if there's one word that I think sums up the whole thing, it's just sad. It's a very sad situation.
Yeah. And she is 89 years old. Shingles is no picnic, as I can well attest. But the pictures, I mean, the images of her are really brutal. I mean, it's just hard to look at. I mean, she's obviously ravaged by not only old age, but also by illness. And I think the other thing is, we live in the age where everybody has a camera. So there are so many images that are going out, and she's sort of surrounded by these, 25-year-old reporters who are like, Senator Feinstein, are you dead yet? Sort of shouting at her and stuff. But I mean, let's face it, bottom line, what does a U.S. senator have to do, really? I mean, when you boil it down, they have to vote and they have to take care of constituents. And, the votes that people were concerned about, which is advancing Joe Biden's judicial appointments. She has shown up to the last two judiciary committees. The Republicans famously wouldn't let the Dems replace her on the committee. Which kind of made that ordinary. And, she's always been someone who's, as going back to the mayor's office, constituent service. So I imagine she has a pretty good staff to take care of that. So, I mean, is there anything that you see that would, other than, Mother Jones ran a piece about it this week, and one of these aforementioned 25-year-olds, writes, I'm sure that people know who Feinstein wished she would die in her sleep, which was like, really? I mean, okay. There was a letter about it to your paper, actually, that I read about. But do you see anything other than the judges that are kind of out there that she really needs to be present and voting for?
I mean, look, we're, in my mind, discussing this on a curve, if you will, okay? There's not a lot of good choices here. Ideally, you would have a senator ideally you would have the Dianne Feinstein of old. Let's talk about that a bit. I mean, she is one of the giants of California politics and will be, I did a column to that effect, she will be remembered alongside Reagan and Earl Warren and others. She was a hugely important figure in terms of a path blazer for women in politics who followed her, including the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Hugely substantively accomplished. If you go out to the desert, that wonderful area that's been preserved, that's her legislation. She has done a lot. She has accomplished a lot. So it would be great to have that Dianne Feinstein. We don't, obviously. So then you start looking at the alternatives. And I've written more than once. There's something to me that is very, very unpalatable about one man, Gavin Newsom, picking 2 senators for 40 million Americans.
Right. So he's already appointed Padilla.
He appointed Padilla, who, let's state, got reelected in his own right last November, which is great. I just have a problem with Gavin Newsom appointing 2 senators. I have a problem with him putting his thumb on the scale. We now have 3 very viable candidates. Well, 4 if you count there's a Republican, but I would not consider him viable to the extent I think it would take,
Eric Early.
I think it would take the stars, the sun, the moon, Pluto, Saturn, all lining up perfectly for him to have any chance of winning. But the point is, we have a competitive Senate race. So to my mind, it's less than ideal, but I would like to see, I would hope that Dianne Feinstein would be able to finish out her term. Like you suggest, she can vote. Staff can handle a lot of the stuff staff has to handle. I would suggest to some of your and my friends on the left, who are the loudest ones clamoring for Dianne Feinstein to step aside, I would watch what you wish for. Because as you suggested, Dianne Feinstein, she was feeling the heat. She put out this idea and suggested, hey, how about a temporary replacement on the Judiciary Committee while I recuperate? Republican said no. Now, if she is replaced, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding, the way things work in the Senate is, you appoint, let's pick a name, Oprah Winfrey. She said she's not interested, but let's say Oprah Winfrey goes back as the
Good
caretaker.
local angle, Mark. Good Santa Barbara angle.
I was going to say, just a shout out to Oprah, who I'm sure is watching. She doesn't just go back and automatically get that seat on the Judiciary Committee. My understanding is Republicans would have to say, okay, fine, great. Now, history, precedent, cordiality, comedy, that's with an M-I-T-Y, all suggest Republicans would do that. But you know what? All those things suggested that you do not hold a Supreme Court seat open for a year and a half and then jam someone through in 3 weeks. So what's stopping Republicans from saying, hey, you know what? Sorry, we're not going to seat that replacement. We're going to have a deadlock on this committee. So Joe Biden's going to get no more judges until he's either reelected or we'll wait till we have a Republican.
Right. And the bottom line is there is no legal or political process, judicial process to force her to resign, short of, someone convincing her. I don't know anybody living in her orbit who is in a position to do that. I don't think her daughter, which is that's been widely speculated about, that's gonna happen. So I think we're status quo there.
Yeah. And it's maddening and it's saddening and it's unfortunate, but again, we don't live in a perfect world. I think you have to weigh the alternatives. And I think next to Dianne Feinstein, the one person on this planet who most wants her to make it all the way to January of 2025 when her term is over is Gavin Newsom.
Right, because he, Mr. Big Mouth, famously said that because he replaced Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, with Padilla, a black woman with a Latino man, he blurted out that if he had another appointment to Feinstein's seat specifically, he would appoint a black woman. Now he's kind of stuck with that. With Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, running for the Senate seat in the 2024 election, a lot of people are sort of saying, oh, see, now you have to appoint Barbara Lee. What do you make of that quickly, that promise, and then sort out the where that race stand? It's only like 10 months till the primary. I was looking.
Yeah. I think it was very impulsive, not surprising on the governor's part.
So unlike him.
Just to sort of blurt it out. You're right. There are some folks who are pressuring Barbara Lee. My feeling, I've said in a column, I think that Barbara Lee should go out and it's not a knock on her, but go out and get elected. If people like what you're selling, go out, campaign on it. I think you should appoint a caretaker, someone, and there are plenty of people. There are a number of accomplished Black women in academia, in the world, nonprofit, Hollywood, you name it. There's no, the list doesn't begin and end. And again, this is a knock on her. Doesn't begin and end with Barbara Lee. There's plenty of folks who could do a good job as a caretaker. Would probably appreciate the career capping aspect of it.
Yeah. What do you hear this a rumor about Maxine Waters a lot? What do you make of that?
I think the people who speculate, it's like the old thing they say, every 4 years we got to go through the ritual of who's the vice presidential nominee going to be. And they say, those who know don't talk and those who talk don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you another sort of Feinstein related question. Joe Biden's going to be 80 years old when he's running for a re-election, and he's shown no suggestion that he's not going to run for re-election. He said he's going to run for re-election. Do you think that there's any harm to him or to the Democrats in general about the gerontocracy of the Democratic Party by having Feinstein kind of hanging out there with all these pictures and so on? You think there's any effect on the presidential?
I think that those of us who do this for a living tend to think that a lot of people think the way that we do. I'm not sure how many real people out there. I mean, sure, there's a lot of discussion of old people, and Biden's old, and Feinstein is old, and it's in the news. I'm not sure how many people are going to necessarily make that connection, or even if they do make the connection, are they going to base their vote on it? I think it's a pretty small number.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the presidential for a little bit. First of all, the mentioning Kamala Harris, there was a tweet the other day by Sarah Longwell from the Bulwark, which was, Republicans are going to run on, Joe Biden's going to be dead and Kamala Harris is going to be alive. How much, have you seen any improvement in her sort of national standing? Does she get a second chance to make a first impression? How much of a weakness is she going to be for Biden?
The narrative, and I hate that word, but I'll use it for discussion. The narrative has been improving of late. There's been a series of articles, and the people who the punditocracy, if you will, and people talk about these things. They're sort of, Kamala Harris seems to have found her footing. She's doing a better job, et cetera, et cetera. That said, she's just one potato away, right? Dan Quayle was all, you saw the same sort of, he's doing much better than everyone thought. Misspells potato, all these things come rushing back. So, if you're Kamala Harris, I imagine you're walking on eggshells and will be for a while. I think Quayle is a good example because Democrats tried really, really hard to make an issue of Dan Quayle when he was running. You would remember because we're old enough to have covered against Michael Chicago. George H.W. Bush. He wasn't as old as Biden by a long stretch, but there was the idea that, Dan Quayle's just a heartbeat away from the presidency, and a lot of efforts to tie Quayle around Bush's neck. And I'm not aware, and it's not to say it can't and won't ever happen, but I don't know of a single presidential campaign that's ever been decided on the basis of a running mate. Now, granted, 80 years old, little different calculation there, but if Joe Biden, if we're having this conversation 2 years from now, and we're still around and sentient and have our wits about us, and we're talking about Republican president, whomever, I don't think we'll be talking about, such and such won because of Kamala Harris. I think it'll be because of Joe Biden or events. I don't think Kamala Harris will be, to use a word that our good friend Mark Mellman uses, I don't think she will be dispositive to the results.
Yeah, dispositive. That's pretty good. Your vocabulary has really improved since
that's a Mark Mellman word.
Convention, when we watched George H.W. Bush introduce Dan Quayle, and
I was there.
Yeah, we were both there. That's right.
But at Canal Street, New Orleans, and he comes off the boat and he's flapping his arms and jumping around. He's like a puppy who had yet to be. It was presaging Tom Cruise on Oprah's couch. Yes, yes, and now we're back. Now we're back to Oprah. I hope you're still watching.
Plenty of free parking. All right, let's talk about the Republican side of the presidential. Obviously, Donald Trump's still leading in the polls, and every time he loses a lawsuit or gets indicted or anything else, he seems to do better. But Ron DeSantis, the sort of grumpy Republican governor of Florida, announced this week. I mean, he's what, 44, 45 years old. So, you could see how the age thing would be, cut in his favor, maybe against Biden. And it seems like the remnants of the, conservative Republican elite are really trying to push him. You had a column this week, though, where you seemed less than impressed with his chances.
Well, I don't want to understate his chances, but my jumping off point was, I've covered, like you, I've done a dozen presidential campaigns, and I've heard iterations over and over of, running for governor of California is just like running for president, or running for governor of Texas is just like running for mayor of New York City. And the point of my column is that there's nothing like running for president and being the governor of a big state. I mean, let's go back to 1996. It's hard to believe now because we all saw how Pete Wilson's presidential campaign crashed and burned, but he was, to use the cliche, the 800-pound gorilla. People were like, oh boy, make way, here comes Pete Wilson, world beater of a candidate, had run terrific campaigns. You can talk about, the tactics, the methodology, but the bottom line is tremendously successful.
Overwhelmingly reelected in 94, and then he was going to get in. Well, he tried to get in 96.
Well, and he did. He ran, and the bottom line is he ran, and he sunk like a stone. Rick Perry, forgive the cliche, hotter than a pistol when he got in the 2012 presidential race. Oh, make way! Here comes Rick Perry, governor of Texas, and he did. He was a terrific candidate. I've covered him. He's a great retail campaigner. He had beaten. It was kind of a clash of the giants in Texas politics. Kay Bailey Hutchison, wiped the floor with her. He was a very, very successful, formidable politician within Texas state lines. Another guy who crashed and burned. So my point was, everyone's like, oh, Ron DeSantis, he won this 19-point landslide in Florida, running for governor, big state. My point, and the point I made, which is something that you as a baseball fan will appreciate, and Ron DeSantis as a Yale college baseball star, being successful in California or Texas or Florida, it's like being a slugger for the Albuquerque Dukes, right? It's like, you're a phenom and you're a superstar and you're doing great. And all doing well at AAA means is you get to go to the majors. And let's see if he can hit big league pitching. And that's where Ron DeSantis is now. Star in AAA, let's see if he can make it in the majors.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference between AAA and the majors. I mean, much more than between AA.
Yeah.
And he did not have a very auspicious start this week either. I didn't understand the whole Twitter play, but maybe you can sort that out for me.
Well, I think it was an effort on his part to be different, be forward-looking. I mean, I think you can't underestimate from the Republican perspective how much a lot of the rank and file, the base, if you will, hates the mainstream media, hates the LA Times, hates Newsmakers with Jerry Roberts, for that matter. Now Elon Musk is turning Twitter into a safe space for conservatives and MAGA types. And so it was sort of an in-your-face to Trump, right? Who everyone associates Trump with Twitter, even though he's now on his own social network. But, it was a chance to put a thumb in the eye of Trump. It was a chance to put a thumb in the eye of the, quote, mainstream or lamestream, as Sarah Palin calls it in media. And like I said, it was kind of like that rocket of Elon Musk that, toppled and blew up on the launch pad. Very janky, glitchy. It was just bad. It was just a bad entree. That said, people who are writing him off, I mean, it's kind of like, really, folks, don't we remember Donald Trump? And how many times do people write him off? So the idea that, it's one and done for Ron DeSantis. I mean, people were overstating his strength going into it. I think people are making too much. It's not an auspicious start, but it's one day in a very, very long campaign.
We always talk about our political in the political writers' big book of cliches. What lane is someone running in? It seems to me that in the Republican primary, there's only two lanes. There's Donald Trump and not Donald Trump. And that none of them, Nikki Haley's out there. I guess Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina has declared. Asa Hutchinson, the governor of what is he?
Former governor of Arkansas. Yeah.
Arkansas, former governor. Yes.
Yeah.
Sarah
Yeah.
Sanders. Yeah. But none of them, except, a little bit of Hutchinson and then Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, who may or may not run, want to say anything negative about Trump. So it's kind of weird. It's like they're saying, oh, he was a great president. The election was stolen from him, and therefore we need to replace him. I mean, how are they going to finesse that message? Or are they all just kind of standing back, waiting for him to get indicted?
I think there's a couple things going on. I mean, one is the rhythm of the race and the calendar, and it's early. And again, we both covered a lot of presidential campaigns. And, it's like, everyone makes nice for a long time until they don't. Right. I remember at one point, this is going back, Paul Tsongas in 1992 was saying, one of the great things about running for president was getting to know my friend Bill Clinton, who, then tore off Tsongas' head when things really got real. So I think when things get real, people have no choice but to more friendly attack Donald Trump. That said, it's the old tragedy of the commons, or I've seen it compared to belling the cat. It's like, right, it's in the advantage of everyone running to bell the cat, but no one wants to be the one to step forward. We saw that in 96. That is how Donald Trump won the nomination, quite simply. Everyone thought he was going to fall away. No one wanted to alienate his supporters. So by the time they got around to going after Donald Trump, it was too late. Will folks make that same mistake this time? I don't know. I think there are others. You mentioned Chris Christie has been very, very frontal in his attacks on him. Tim Scott is interesting. He's the only Black Republican senator from South Carolina, very popular. In fact, South Carolina, you mentioned Nikki Haley, has two candidates running. He is running, contrasting himself with Donald Trump, not directly by attacking Trump, but by talking about optimism and sunshine, the kind of Republicanism we associate with Jack Kemp, or more particularly with Ronald Reagan. So he's drawing a contrast, not by attacking. Now, to bring it back to DeSantis, who's really interesting and a bit of a puzzlement, because he is, as we sit here today, I would suggest the strongest potential rival to Trump. And yet he's basically, he's not doing a lot to differentiate himself from Trump, right? It was this idea that I'm not Donald Trump, but I'm competent. Well, his launch wasn't too great, notwithstanding what I just said. He's going after woke and Disney and this and that, sort of other things. So it's kind of interesting.
It's all culture issues all the time with him.
It's right. It's basically a culture. It's a campaign of grievance and anger, and you're not going to out anger or out grieve Donald Trump. So it's a bit of a curiosity why he's not sort of leading more into the record of, I'm governor of Florida. Here's what I've accomplished. I mean, you look at successful governors who've run. Look at George W. Bush. It was all about what he did on education and criminal justice reform in Texas. I mean, governors tend to be successful because they run on stuff they've accomplished. Now, DeSantis could talk about stuff he's accomplished, going after woke this and that and going after Disney. But it's a bit of a curiosity why, and maybe it's to come, why he's not sort of leaning more into his substantive record as Florida governor.
Well, of course, one of the things he accomplished was to sign a 6-week abortion ban. And Scott, the aforementioned Scott, has kind of fumbled around about whether he would favor a national ban or not a ban. The conventional wisdom is abortion was a huge reason that the Democrats really didn't get their clock cleaned in the 2022 midterms. Is it still going to be a salient issue? I've seen a lot of commentary that it's bringing out younger voters and stuff. How important is that going to be going forward, do you think?
I think it's going to stay an important issue. As long as you have things in the headline, like just this morning about this doctor in Indiana who's before the medical board because she had performed an abortion on a 10-year-old girl who had to leave Ohio. A 10-year-old was raped. As long as we have those kinds of stories, as long as we have legislatures banning abortion. And you have to assume that the issue is not going to go away because you're going to have all these states which have passed, in effect, abortion bans. I mean, 6 weeks in some states, as you suggested. Some women don't even know they're pregnant at that point. So I don't see the issue going away because I don't see these kinds of stories, these anecdotes, these real life dramas being in the news and keeping the issue front and center. And it has not helped Republicans at all. And it's an interesting thing, what Ron DeSantis and others are doing. Obviously, a very important issue in a Republican primary. But once you do that primary, good luck trying to pivot.
Right. And, the extremists on that issue in the Republican Party are going to press for all the candidates to pledge, yes, I'll support a federal abortion ban, which is not going to help either. The other thing about DeSantis, and you mentioned Disney a couple times, I'm old enough to remember when Republicans were the party that wanted to keep government, away from private business and, let private enterprise. Now they're using state power to go after business, which seems, I don't know, evolutionary, devolutionary, something. Is that a popular position among Republicans now?
Well, it's a popular position as populism rises in the Republican Party, but you're right, it is contra what Republicans have traditionally stood for. And there are some folks like Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, who's very likely to get into the race, who have made exactly that point. It's like, this is what Republicans stand for, right? We don't use government power to go after business. So that, I think, is going to be one of the debates and one of the interesting debates that we're going to hear in the Republican primary, because you're right, it is not at all. It has not at all been Republican orthodoxy. Now, Donald Trump has changed a lot of Republican orthodoxy. I mean, other than abortion and taxes on trade, on immigration, on all sorts of policies and things that used to be Republican orthodoxy, that's going to be one of the things that's going to be hashed out in this Republican primary.
Yeah, and it's interesting that DeSantis has I think very consciously moved himself to the right of Trump on that, because Trump blamed the abortion issue for Republicans not doing better in 2022. Of course, with all of his usual consistency. I'm the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, and this abortion issue cost us a bunch. I mean, it's a typical kind of Trump thing. All right, we got just a couple minutes left, and so there's no way to avoid talking about Trump, I suppose. You had a column a couple of weeks ago after the E. Jean Carroll verdict in New York, the woman who said she was sexually assaulted by him and then defamed by him, and succeeded in that suit. And of course, he went on CNN that night and defamed her again. But you note that generally when things like this happen, Trump gets more popular among the Republican base. So now we got cases in Georgia, the vote fraud case in Georgia. There's the special counsel looking at all kinds of things, and then the Manhattan DA at the Stormy Daniels thing. Is there a point at which there's a critical mass that's reached in Trump's legal problems for the Republican base, for his voters, where they say, what, this probably is too much? Or does he just continue to be able to say, see, they're going after me because they want to go after you?
I think his base is pretty unshakable. Now, whether that's 28 or 33% of the Republican electorate, I don't know. I think they're pretty unshakable, but I think that there is a substantial portion of Republicans out there who are open to an alternative. And if I can quote myself, I think what I said in that column was, what happens the next few weeks in courthouses is less important than what happens on the campaign trail. And by that, I meant, if the reflex is, if he's indicted in Georgia, which seems likely, if there's more cases coming from the special prosecutor on the documents in Florida, which seems likely, and if his Republican opponents poo-poo it or rally around him, then we're very likely to see Republicans do the same. So my question is, at what point do his Republican opponents take those issues on? It's one thing for the lamestream media like you and me to say this is bad and this is terrible. And it's one thing for Democrats and people who hate Trump to do it. But we have yet to see, Asa Hutchinson put out sort of a tut-tut, oh, this is, after the Eugene Carroll sort of a tut-tut thing. My question is, at what point do his Republican opponents take up these issues and go to Republicans who are open-minded and willing to support someone other than Trump and say, this is a problem? So that's what I mean by it's more important what's done and said on the campaign trail than it is within the confines of a courthouse.
Yeah. And Trump won in 2016 with that base because it was a crowded primary, and everybody thought they were going to be the guy that benefited when Trump went down. And you can see, Trump welcomes Tim Scott into the race. I mean, I think, of course, he wants a crowded race. So, gee whiz, I don't know, but he's not their strongest general election candidate by any means.
No, he's not. But, I think those of us, again, who do this for a living, we think a lot about electability. I think for a lot of Republicans, and frankly, a lot of Democrats, a lot of party activists, they don't care so much about electability. They want someone who's going to fight, someone who's going to go in there and bloody the nose of the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Negative partisanship, as we like to say in the
exactly
political science world. All right, last thing, another a poll by our old friend Mark DiCamillo out this morning about the debt limit, and I won't force you to comment on that, but I was kind of gobsmacked by the numbers for Biden, and it was like 48-46 or something. I mean, in California, which he won by what, more than 30 points, right? What do you think that's a function of?
You mean his approval or the debt thing? I mean,
his approval. Biden's shrinking approval rating in California.
I don't want to quote Biden, but he always says, compare me to the alternative, not the almighty. I think we're at a stage where people are thinking about alternatives, the idealized version of a Democratic nominee. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that if Joe Biden runs for president, he will get 89 to 92, 93% of the Democratic vote, including in California. I think right now we're sort of the theoretical stage of the race where people are thinking, well, gee, I would really love it if Biden were to step aside and fill in the blank were to be the nominee instead. At the end of the day, it's come down to a choice, I think, between Biden and a Republican. And most Democrats, despite what they're saying in May of this year, will be with Biden in November of 2024.
All right, there you have it. Mark Z. Barabak, roving political columnist for Los Angeles Times. Must read, subscribe to his newsletter. How do people subscribe to the newsletter?
Well, if they click on my column, they get a choice to sign up for it, or they can just email me at mark.barabak@latimes.com, and I have my own little thing I got going, and I'll be happy to sign up. You won't get spams, you'll just get links when they come out. All
right. You look older, but your energy never seems to get any older. So Z, thanks for joining me. I appreciate you being on the show. And now he's off to interview yet another old geezer for another series of columns. So thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, it's Jerry again. Before we go, I just wanted to make everyone aware of a situation that's going on with Josh Molina, our usual panelist, who, as most of you know, also does a podcast, Santa Barbara Talks, and, sort of indicative of this strange media era we live in. YouTube has removed from its servers Josh's interview this week with Greg Gandrew, the treasurer of the state Republican Party, former Carp city councilman. And at one point, Greg and Josh were talking about COVID, and Greg was actually hospitalized for 44 days with COVID, and he talked about his views on it. He was not vaccinated at the time, although he did not speak out against vaccination. He did say, however, at one point that he wanted to be treated with ivermectin, the great horse medicine, and they wouldn't allow him to. Anyway, it was, in that context, but YouTube's logs or whatever happened, picked up on the word ivermectin and removed the interview from its servers. But anyway, it's a strange thing. It's a complicated question about big tech and journalism and yada, yada. But I just think it's a good opportunity to go to Josh's website, Santa Barbara Talks. And you can see the entire Gandrud interview there, including his prohibited mention of ivermectin. Josh's point, of course, is he's a journalist, and we want to get people's views. And while you're there, take the opportunity to subscribe to Josh's podcast. Help him out with that a little bit, and you'll see him back here on Newsmakers next time. So thanks for that, and we'll see you next time.